This show is brought to you by Buzzsprout.com, the best and excitingly prettiest way to start a podcast.
Welcome back to The Tale's End, everybody. On this show, we talk movies, we talk TV shows, we talk comic books, novels, video games, and beyond, some relative and some not so relative in both time and space. And we are back for the ones who live, and damn! I have some things to say. Last time we covered episodes 1 to 4, so for those who missed that and don't want to feel left out, Living Radio Part 1 is, of course, up there for you. This time around, we're going to dive into episodes 5 and 6, the final 2 episodes of the season, which, of course, caps off our coverage of this particular show. We've got a bunch of stuff to cover, including what I personally think worked about the series, what maybe didn't work so well, some Easter eggs and hidden messages that you might have missed, and the overall effect that this show might have on the rest of the Walking Dead franchise going forward. Both positives and particularly looming negatives, bearing in mind that a lot of what I'll say here is just a certain way of looking at things. If you enjoy what we do over here on Ray Broadcasting, then please consider subscribing, and definitely don't forget to hit that download button and leave a rating or review, as it really does help show your support for the podcast. Full disclosure, unlike last time's analysis where each section was written just after each episode aired, these final 2 episodes were watched back to back in the space of a few hours, so you'll hear that having knowledge of how this series ends ahead of writing this review has coloured my opinion and changed the lens through which I view this particular show, and therefore how I have chosen to structure this, I'm going to call it a discussion. Last time around was more of a love fest. This time we're going full conclusions and contusions. If you tuned into Q&A Cabaret number 4, you'll know that we're in another format experimentation phase over here at Ray Broadcasting, and honestly, despite my personal feelings as a Walking Dead fan, I couldn't have asked for a better thing to pick apart in my own weird little way than the final 2 episodes of The Walking Dead, The Ones Who Live.
Alright, and here we go.
Episode 5, titled Become, a continuation and completion of last episode's title, What We, opens up with something, or more accurately someone, that I personally didn't expect, and that someone was Father Gabriel. We begin focused on his calm, calculated walking pace, although in terms of the shot itself, it's actually just his legs, so I didn't recognise it was actually fully him until he hears the sound of a helicopter flying overhead and turns to reveal his face to the camera, not before drawing his machete on a singular approaching walker, one which manages to get a hold of him due to the technically more irregular distraction of a passing chopper. And right off the bat, even though this is probably reading too much into it, I immediately enjoy the contrast that we talked about a little last time when it comes to post-apocalyptic priorities. You know, what's more interesting, an approaching walker or a passing chopper? Definitely the chopper. I mean, who gives a shit about the walker? I can't kill a chopper with a machete, I don't think. So, you know, the walker can wait. Because in this universe, aviation trumps flesh-eating monsters. It's like we said, walkers are now just deadly cattle that herd up and migrate, or rather, that's what they have become to people who, in this instance, in this opening few seconds, have been changed by them and other experiences that wouldn't have come to pass were it not for the walker's existence. And there are few better examples of that than Father Gabriel. Gabriel is a character who we first meet in Season 5 of the original show, attempting and failing to flee in complete abject terror from a few walkers before being rescued by Rick's group. Rick's group, however, for those who don't remember, had just broken free of the Terminus arc, with Rick also being fresh off of his encounter with the Claimers, an encounter that featured the famous throat-ripping moment, which we'll get to later because it will become, mwahaha, super relevant later down the line. Anyway, I couldn't help but be reminded of that original character introduction for Father Gabriel as I watched him be reintroduced here. Here's a priest who went from cowering from walkers along with his own selfish misdeeds to facing them down and finally becoming so used to their presence, at least as far as the walkers go, that he's happy to turn his back as one approaches. Now don't get me wrong, there are many, many characters on The Walking Dead that go from coward to badass over time, but Gabriel's character arc stands out beyond that, in my opinion. After being on the road with Rick's group for a while and finally arriving in Alexandria, the group's still mostly suspicious of what Gabriel might be hiding. Gabriel takes this opportunity to ingratiate himself into the sheltered civilian life of the town and also informs its leader that Rick and his group are too dangerous and must be sent back outside the walls. This deception is discovered and culminates in Gabriel admitting and repenting for his past sins, most of which consisted of locking innocent people out of the safety of his church out of fear and just sitting against the door and listening to them die as they screamed and cried for help while being eaten alive. We'll get back to the ones who live in just a minute, as I'm aware we are still only in the opening few seconds of episode 5, but bear with me. I just like how a lot of Father Gabriel's defining character moments in the original show took place in churches, or were at the very least church adjacent. There's the one that we only hear about being the initial barricading. There's the moment with Sasha in the church in Alexandria where he finally admits and repents for those past misdeeds, which further results in him willing and offering to help despite being shot down by the group as time goes on in seasons 5 and 6. And then he really steps up when he carries, at that time, baby Judith to the safety of his church while walkers swarm the town. An even bigger leap of faith is taken when he inspires other civilians sheltered within his new church to rise up and help take back Alexandria. From there, he learns the ways of Rick's group, while ultimately retaining his faith, and throughout subsequent seasons is given many reactionary roles to play in the survivors' fights against Negan, the Whisperers, and the Commonwealth. I particularly like, in general, how he, possibly due to being absent for Negan's Season 7 introduction, and therefore spared of that particular loss of faith and confidence, becomes the one to restore the others' faith and confidence within themselves after what they have all experienced and, of course, been heavily traumatized by. Gabriel learns to react and adapt to decisions being made mostly by others and ultimately becomes central in steering the fates of many who he comes across, while also awakening or reawakening their faith, including Jadis, though Gabriel calls her by her given name, Anne. Before we get to those two, let's talk about Rick and Michonne's apocalyptic honeymoon, as Scott Gimple called it. Definitely the lighter side of the episode, and also a bit of a callback to a Rick and Michonne focused supply run episode in the original show. Always nice to see characters smile and actually enjoy themselves from time to time. The Walking Dead universe tends to be designed around moments and events of horror, loss, and strife, with some occasional triumphs peppered in throughout, triumphant moments or periods that are often then followed by more loss and more strife that remind the survivors we follow not to become complacent. At least, that's how the original show tended to be designed. There is, of course, more beyond that, but that is one way that you could describe parts of the original structure of the Walking Dead TV adaptation. This show, however, is slightly different, as we have discussed before, at least as far as the lead characters go and how the creators have structured and balanced their triumphs versus their losses and hardships. The clue is in the title, obviously. It's called The Ones Who Live, a phrase coined by Michonne in the original show that inspires Rick to fight back against, at that point, Negan. That, at least, was its initial narrative purpose in terms of a phrase, an inspiring phrase, to look back at all of the seemingly insurmountable things that Rick and Michonne have survived together against all the odds, and to use those collective triumphs to power through the bad times and never stop fighting. Never give up, never give in, never stop believing, no matter how bad things get, or rather, believe for a little longer, no matter how bad things get. And if you do that, you will hopefully be one of the ones who live in this crazy world of the dead. That's a message that I love. It strengthens me when I think about it in this current context, and I'm sure that it has done the same for many others who can somehow apply that message to their own life and keep marching forward during difficult times. That, I'm sure, or I'm hoping, is what the creators who wrote that line and further developed the conveyance of this positive, inspiring message intended. I don't want to downplay the importance of that message in any way. Here's my problem with it now, though. Remember how we talked last time about how this show went through a lot of format changes and how that doesn't tend to be a good sign, historically speaking, or can cause issues? Well, working titles tend to be a part of that format changing process. I believe that The Walking Dead Summit was one of the working titles that they had, and might have gone with for this series. But what this show has unintentionally done by choosing The Ones Who Live as its final title is turn Michonne's words to Rick from inspiring and strengthening to downright fourth wall breaking. This point will probably come up a few times throughout this discussion, so I wanted to point it out early on so that we can dive deeper in when those moments arise and try and come at them from different angles each time. If you haven't seen the show, then trust me, you'll hear what I mean. Now, was this problem something that I felt was present during this opening sequence where we see Rick and Michonne discovering food, having romantic moments by the fire, discovering stuff to drink and stumbling upon a gift shop to wander around in? No, at least not on my first time watching. I was just seeing it initially as characters who had been through a whole lot of pain and heartache being given a break, or rather a series of lucky but also incredibly well-deserved breaks. And again, I'm sure that was the intention on the part of the creators. They put these characters through a whole lot to get here, and that's including the events of the original show. So by the time we get to the point where they're reunited and have worked things out between them, then there should be lighter moments that show why they fought so hard to find each other in the first place. That makes sense. The Ones Who Live, however, marks an interesting change in tone for this universe, given that, as mentioned before, this is a love story, a story of reunion. A reunion of two people who were formidable separately, but basically unstoppable together. This is even echoed by one of the antagonists in the show itself, who we'll get to in just a minute. This tone change, however, means there's something to be said for the resulting lack of tension in terms of Michonne and Rick's safety. Now, maybe that was technically the overall point, and that was the intention. These characters do often seem larger than life, and this is a fictional story, and we want to see our characters win. I can accept that. I even like it. And I accepted it, and liked it, all the way through most of this episode. First the good life sequence, then the cute gift shop scene, then the scene in the forest where we see Rick and Michonne showing a heartwarming amount of kindness to some robbers and taking charge of an armed mugging situation that in the original show would have had you hiding your face in a pillow because you weren't sure who would come out alive. It's technically a nice contrast to either the tone of the original show or the earlier episodes of this spin-off, and allows for some nice, somewhat gentle comedy, and does actually come back to bite Rick and Michonne in the ass later in quite an interesting way, but definitely not hard enough to break through their plot armor. And here's the problem again, the dilemma I'm having. The dichotomy of whether or not I'm enjoying seeing Rick and Michonne be invincible together while imparting lessons and spreading good cheer, or whether it annoys me because it takes away from their humanity in terms of the danger factor. I suppose you could make this point about any main characters that are written to survive anything in any story, whether they learn a lesson in the process or come out mentally and physically unscathed. As long as, of course, it's written well. But there's something about this new tone, this new style of writing that's somehow not gelling with my brain in the presumed intended way. There are ways to write putting powerful characters under pressure despite how thick their plot armor may be, which was something the creators seemed to understand from episodes 1 to 4. This, though, to me, is riding the line between being self-aware and slightly trolling its audience. The more I think about this issue as I write this script and read it back over, a lot of me keeps coming back to that bad joke I made last time around when I mentioned my brain making an automatic abbreviation for this Walking Dead spin-off. I called it the Walking Dead Towel, simply because that's the resultant acronym of this show's title. But I'd like to maybe extend that into an analogy that I'll mention as a shorthand for this dilemma that keeps cropping up. The plot armor of these two main characters that was present but somehow less tonally overt in the original show has resulted in the creators throwing in the towel, as per the old fighting ring phrase, when it comes to this show's sense of tension and suspense. Not entirely, but mostly. The rest of the narrative paints Rick and Michonne as superheroes as opposed to capable survivors with luck on their side, as if they've gone from existing as the former to becoming the latter, which is probably why the two of them were put in such vulnerable states at the beginning of this series. so that by the time that we got to this point, it would feel more balanced and also deserved. And it does feel deserved to some extent, especially when you consider the history between these two characters. But it also feels like what it is. Performers who are intricately involved with the crafting of the script and the creative process of the project, wanting deserved happy endings for the characters that they've played for such a long time. And honestly, I don't say that as a criticism, because on its own, it's not. I want these characters to have happy endings too. I'm sure that many fans are with me on that. That does not mean, however, that I want the tension of the show to suffer as a result, and for it to just be accepted that Rick and Michonne are invincible now. Love story or no, this is still The Walking Dead. And when we look at the moments that follow, and furthermore the finale that closes it all, you'll have a better idea of what I mean if you haven't seen the show already. Oh, and this has nothing to do with tension necessarily, but right before Rick and Michonne hear the bad muggers screaming and go into superhero mode, Rick says this.
You know, I never let go. I denied it. I pushed you away, but I never let go.
I didn't know.
There's just no need for that exchange, I'm sorry. Michonne mentions Pearl beforehand, and so it feels like an excuse on the creator's part to either update Michonne on Pearl's origin and give Rick an exposition dump that gives way to a supposedly charming line, and somehow also reminding the audience of Pearl's origin when we already know, which would have been fine if the Pearl side of it went anywhere, but we'll see later that it just doesn't. Or just mention Pearl as an excuse for the needless exchange in itself. Now, one, I don't need to see Rick doubling down post-reconciliation. I just don't need to see it. And two, Michonne knowing about Pearl's origin does absolutely nothing to service the rest of the story, as we will later see. So it just feels like an exchange of dialogue that acts as a strange segue into a bit of plot armor-plated action. Now that I'm reading this, I genuinely find this episode probably the most conflicting of the series so far. I think that's why this particular section is a little bit all over the place. Despite my personal dilemmas, despite the scratchy towels, which we'll get back to because they don't stop coming up and being thrown in as the show goes on, there's a particularly ridiculous moment that I'm excited to get to. I also, conversely, like the downtime that Rick and Michonne get to experience. I like this moment, for example.
Toothpaste. Booze. What are you up to, Grimes?
I'm just working with what I got.
These more human moments between Rick and Michonne, minus the doubling down thing that we just talked about, are really nice. But I think the heart of this particular episode lies in Gabriel and Jadis' scenes together, because for me, they help balance out this new towely tone that I find so conflicting. The first 15 minutes of the episode allow for the honeymoon period, minus Gabriel's introduction, and that nice aforementioned moment with the booze and the toothpaste, etc., contrasts with the reveal to the audience that Rick and Michonne are being pursued by a figure in black. Due to trailer footage and the fact that it cuts from the figure straight to the flashback featuring Gabriel, we know that this figure is likely Jadis.
Bless this water that it may become your holy water.
Gabriel. It's okay. I'm alone.
Is it okay? Even if you are alone?
Alright, so there may be a little bit to unpack with this line. Let's start with what's on the surface. The surface level, at least as far as I'm concerned, says Gabriel's referring to the danger of Jadis' unpredictability and therefore his own safety. If we dig a little deeper, however, and attempt to broaden the meaning of Gabriel's words, he could be referring to humanity being alone in the universe, not in terms of alien life, but rather deities. In other words, he might be asking, as if to a non-believer, is it really better to believe that God doesn't exist and that nothing happens for any rhyme or reason than to believe there might be something else out there watching over you? Which option is more comforting to you? Which helps you sleep better at night, and why, etc. It's like a test for faith and a possible reason for it wrapped into a nice little bow. And coming from Gabriel, a man of God who has had his faith tested a number of times and in a number of ways, as a first line, as a first response, means a great deal more given where we find Jadis near the end of this episode. Anyway, we see Gabriel embrace Jadis, which is nice to see. These two shared a bond in the original show, and after Jadis left to join the CRM full-time and earned enough respect and clout to fly off on her own, we see her able to maintain that bond in a way by meeting with Gabriel on the same day once a year. She doesn't exactly confess her sins or detail anything about her work with the CRM to Father Gabriel in these flashbacks. Jadis keeps it vague and in a way lets the angel sitting by her left shoulder be the one to attempt to decipher the truth about her heart and bring out Jadis's inner Anne. I like how Jadis also feigns surprise when Gabriel imparts the news of Rick's death and what happened on the bridge. It's a nice reminder that everyone outside of the plot of this spin-off show who survived the original is pretty much completely in the dark about these events taking place over years. I also like Gabriel's simple but effective listed answer to Jadis's question about how he reconciles the post-apocalyptic killing with his faith. Prayer, amends, and talk. Other than a positive message, I suppose, these are references to Gabriel's moments of character growth that turned him into the man he is today. And though Jadis is unable to talk about the things she's done, or will do, she also knows that she doesn't necessarily have to impart the details. Jadis can just talk about how she feels, or rather, how Anne feels. Jadis, played by the way by the wonderful Pollyanna McIntosh, really is killing it in this episode and this show in general, but particularly this episode. A wonderful performance and a great character that has spanned across 3 shows in this universe. We all love Jadis. I mean, at least I do. But goddammit, does her sense of pride and respect get the better of her from time to time. And I'm thinking particularly of when she manages to silently break her way into Rick and Michonne's lovely cottage, or cabin, that they liberated from the gift shop. It was a really good gift shop. Have 2 guns pointed at their heads while they sleep, all of her problems 1 dual-wielding trigger pull away, and she decides to wake them up. Now, of course, I don't want the main characters to die in such an unfair and unreasonable manner. That would have been ballsy though. But this is Jadis throwing in the towel here, or rather the writers asking her to do so. No tension. Just none whatsoever. And yes, you could argue that that tension that I'm crying out for is not the point. And all we're actually waiting for is to see how Rick and Michonne suavely make their way out of this new predicament they found themselves in. Sure. And again, I could still accept that if it didn't make Jadis look a little bit stupid, because she's written smarter than this. Like, just like Rick should have joined the CRM before cutting off his own hand. Characters seem to have slightly lost their brains in favor of an entertaining scene, which is also an entertaining scene, I suppose, and that's why this towel problem is so conflicting and itchy and just leaves you scratching away at it, because what the narrative decisions made by the characters are in service of is okay, I guess, but given Jadis doesn't even last 10 seconds against Rick and Michonne, despite having 2 guns trained on them, letting them wake up and binding their hands is, again, in service of showing how amazing Rick and Michonne are, which, once again, other than plot convenience, is probably the point. But I think it also speaks to the disservice done to tough characters like Jadis. They could have let her get some hits in rather than just making her look slightly dense as opposed to respectful, which I think is also what they were going for. And we're also trying to build up, in terms of previous mentions in earlier episodes, of how in awe Jadis really is of these 2 heroes. But was that just to justify this ridiculous decision later down the line, or make it more convincing? Like the top-heavy humanization versus superhero towel issue that we keep seeing come up as the episode progresses? Why did Jadis kick the axe back in their direction? Why is there this line?
You could have made other choices, but you didn't lose here. You went a different way. It's the end of your story.
Like, I know it's foreshadowing for Jadis' demise and her finding herself as she dies and winning back her inner self as opposed to winning the world for the CRM, etc. But stop making her talk like she's a self-aware character that's annoyed that she can't kill her targets because they're the reason she's here. Narratively, I mean. It's a tough line to walk since Jadis's plot armor is much thinner than Rick and Michonne's. I mean, Jadis is the one wearing actual armor, holding up 2 guns, and Rick and Michonne are sitting there tied up in their pants, so that alone, as a not altogether unwelcome image, should show you just how bad this towel plot armor problem is becoming. But trust me, it gets even more egregious. But for now, we get to go back to the heart. Gabriel and Jadis talk about Rick and Michonne's marital status, and Gabriel gives Jadis a ring that he found. On my first watch, I thought that Gabriel wasn't going to make it to the end, and so, oddly enough, that was the more interesting and entertaining part of this plot for me, as opposed to Rick and Michonne being invincible, which again I think speaks to the strength of the supporting characters in this universe. I was also happier when they were on screen together because this flashback B-plot wasn't actively annoying me, especially when it comes to Jadis's necessarily vague explanations about her inner conflict.
Well, I have spent the last year looking forward to our next visit. Just sitting here and talking. Almost makes me feel like who I was the other 364 days back there. It's less about personal connection and more about responsibility to something greater than myself. Even if that means I have to do things that are difficult. Even cruel.
Gabriel counters that knowing that she's doing wrong means that that version of herself that she has to be is not who she really is. And Jadis replies that it's about survival, but not just hers, others as well. And although Jadis's mission is warped, and she doesn't seem to be taking into account how many innocent people may die in the process, and this is compounded when she refuses Gabriel's plea for supplies, considering she just got done going on about saving the world, that's an internal conflict that I find interesting. But moving on to the present day car chase, since Jadis has now been smacked with a bed frame and sliced with the hatchet that Michonne picked up in the cute gift shop scene, we have a further narrative reason to turn Jadis into a now pretty terrible driver. But I like how it's Rick and Michonne that end up chasing her initially instead of the other way around, because she's probably now slightly terrified of these invincible people. Again, conflicting scratchy towel. After Michonne manages to run Jadis off the road, Jadis manages to shake her super pursuers long enough to run into those muggers who Rick and Michonne helped slightly reform earlier in the episode. The muggers choose to help Jadis as opposed to threaten her, and though that's lovely character growth for them, it doesn't last very long as they end up getting munched, but at least they died better people. Right? Those deaths, however, are not before one of my favourite exchanges between Rick and Michonne in this entire series as they discover where Jadis is hiding.
The bases are spread out across the country. We need to know which one she hid it in. If we can take her alive, talk to her. You heard her hate being called Anne. I think she's still in there somewhere. And if there's something she can give us first, something to help keep Alexandria safe.
We'll keep it safe, but she's gonna die.
We need to keep it safe without risking anything. I couldn't see some things. I couldn't. You help me. Maybe we can help her. And if we can't,
Then I can kill her.
be my guest. Maybe just name first.
I just love how bloodthirsty but also funny Michonne is in this moment, and I also like that Rick is attempting to not get on the wrong side of that bloodthirstiness. Anyway, I mentioned that the muggers get munched, which is sad to see, but a very Walking Dead kindness can get you killed regardless of when you choose to show it kind of thing. But it gives way to one of the most needless scratchy towel moments. A tiny thing that's actually not very tiny that they could have just not put in the show. Rick getting shot in the head. Or rather, the bullet grazing his head. Alright, I know I just got done complaining about how they did Jadis a disservice by not letting her get that many hits in, considering that it doesn't really seem to matter what you throw at these main characters in this show. They're going to win regardless, even in their sleep. And so, you may feel that I'm about to contradict myself when I say that this particular close call between Jadis and Rick was unnecessary. I say that not because occurrences such as this are impossible, but because it compounds the lack of tension once again. Jadis even says, right after the near miss, you two together, you really are unstoppable. Again. I swear, it's like the writers are using Jadis as a semi-reliable vehicle or mouthpiece to reinforce, but also apologise for what's coming in the final episode of the series. apologising particularly to those who were excited to see these new spin-offs connect in some compelling way. But we shall get there when we get there. After having Jadis repeat the overall point of this series, again, that was the moment when, upon a first watch, not knowing how this show would end, I began to get worried. But knowing how it ends, as I write this and read it back over, it just makes me angry. Because I then remembered the prediction I discussed near the end of the last show, when we talked about the possibility of Michonne faltering in terms of how to move forward, and Rick maybe being the one to convince her otherwise, even though it would have been a strange character shift for Michonne, to be honest. But it would have still shown Rick's growth as a character, and his return to form, etc., and shows that Michonne can at least falter slightly in this episode. But finding out that that moment in that trailer was actually a fake out, that it was just Michonne stalling for time and directing Rick with her eyes, I guess that's fine. But what's this supposed to show us beyond yet another potentially interesting character moment being erased before our eyes? And how much more gullible you seem to become when you've lost a few pints of blood? Oh, but then we see that Jadis didn't actually trust them, so she pulls a gun on Rick while Michonne goes to get some supplies. Again, I honestly thought that Jadis was smarter than this, but maybe it's because she's injured or doesn't really want to kill them, as we found out later. But still, my point, or rather, question would be, do all the characters around Rick and Michonne from episode 5 onwards have to suddenly be written as stupid, incompetent, or have to be losing blood in order to make Rick and Michonne seem unstoppable? Or are we supposed to be impressed by this? Because there is, or was, something about the CRM, and by extension in some ways Jadis, that is, or was, genuinely threatening. At least, that's the vibe I got when I remember watching episodes 1 to 4. That confrontation in Rick's apartment where Jadis reduces Rick to tears, making him feel so helpless and paranoid, that worked for me. It really worked for me, and I don't want you guys to misunderstand. Rick and Michonne are a formidable force together. But when you, as a creator, provide all the great build-up that we saw from episodes 1 to 3, with imprisonment, amputation, baby deaths by gassing, a 500-year plan, echelon briefings, and what years of separation can do to the strongest of people, the strongest of bonds, and then start contrasting that, post-reconciliation, with near-miss headshots, further gullible antagonists that seemed previously untouchable, and a 500-year plan that's not actually much of a plan, along with a few trailer fake-outs to entice, somewhat emptily, I can't help but look at the show in a different way. That's why, again, this review or discussion is a bit all over the place, because it honestly seems like night and day between the first 4 episodes and these last 2 on the Rick and Michonne versus CRM side. And it's thrown me off a little bit. I had problems with episodes 1 to 4, but I at least believed, and still believe, that they were competently executed in many ways. But it also feels like they went for top-heavy humanity in the first 4 to compensate for and somehow justify having basic invincibility and unbreakable plot armor in the last 2. Well, it doesn't justify it. The good build-up makes all these easy payoffs much less believable, and to me is only redeemed by the inserted flashbacks featuring Gabriel and Jadis. That and Pollyanna McIntosh's wonderful performance in her final scene.
Everything I've ever had, I've lost. My people, my friends, everyone. I was tired of losing. I was finally part of something that could last. I couldn't lose another community. My old one. My new one. And I knew if I didn't kill you all, somehow, someway you come for the CRM. So I drew up the dossier to protect myself.
I also like how Rick and Michonne sit and listen to Jadis, or Anne, as she approaches her turning. Anne asks them both not to come for the CRM, and although we don't know for sure what Rick was about to say because Michonne speaks first, the look on Rick's face would seem to suggest that he was about to tell Anne no. we won't come for them, perhaps letting her believe as she dies that the CRM will bring the world back. But interestingly, as we've seen a lot throughout the series, one of the through lines, to me anyway, or recurring themes has been about realities or even identities being shattered and new ones being put in their place, whether they be for good or for ill, or even both at the same time. We've got Rick's new reality at the beginning of the series, him truly believing that he could get back, and we see that slowly being broken down. We see his dreams being broken and burned, and that too changes the reality that he wakes up in, one where he has to give up because they've taken everything from him. Michonne then further shatters that reality and brings him back to a state of strength. Michonne's reality of Rick being lost shattered when she knocked him out the sky and nearly killed him, but she found him in a broken state, so the hope of a happy reunion, that reality was shattered, and so on and so forth. In terms of Jadis' death, Michonne, fresh off of reawakening her lost husband, chooses to give Jadis a synopsis of the finale. Very kind of her, since Jadis obviously won't be around for it, but it serves as a synopsis in a slightly more annoying and pessimistic sense when you realise that what Michonne tells Anne is basically exactly what happens, so we can add clairvoyance to the list of Michonne's new superpowers, along with scriptwriter. But it works on a deeper level too, which is what redeems the moment, because the shattering of reality gives way to Jadis letting go and relaxing back into her true self, her life as Anne, before everything, as an artist.
It was never about survival in that life. It was just about truth.
The reality, the identity of Jadis shattered by Michonne's words, giving way to truth. I have to say, the first time I watched this scene, I cried. I absolutely loved this as a final moment between these characters. I like that Rick technically fulfills his promise to Anne that he made earlier in the series.
Go ahead. Do what you said you would do. Please.
I will.
But the fact that it's a mercy killing because she's been bitten as opposed to a simple murder out of anger or revenge, as per the foreshadowing implication, was a nice surprise to me. It also made me remember that walkers are a threatening presence, given that for a lot of this series, they've been painted as more of a nuisance. It was kind of weird that Jadis didn't hear the walkers approaching, but that's happened a lot in the original show as well, and I remember an online theory constant gunshots to kill walkers and other enemies having an effect on the character's hearing over time, due to lack of earplugs and other things. I think it might have been MatPat over on Film Theory, so that's always been in my head canon as a justification for how walkers can still sneak up on people, especially all these years later. There were a lot of gunshots fired in that scene in that enclosed space, so it's possible in terms of this narrative that ears were collectively ringing, and if the walkers aren't constantly making noise, you therefore don't hear them coming. That I can actually make an exception for, but in this case I would rather spend my time exploring the need for vulnerability, because for most of the rest of the time, this episode was exploring the direct opposite of that. Anne's death, however, was classic Walking Dead, but honestly, watching her get chewed on really made me remember what show I was watching, or rather, the universe that it's set in. Plot armor used to be so thin on this show for most of the characters, and I suppose that we began to understand as the original show went on that certain characters would be kept safe narratively speaking, other than some huge marketing nightmares. Then again, they killed off Carl, which, although I didn't agree with that as I expanded on last time, it did subvert my expectations back then, but not in a good way. And I kind of feel the same with the ones who live, at least when it comes to this episode and then the finale. My expectations were subverted, and it did lead to something, but the amount of wasted potential is almost palpable, as we shall see in episode 6. Oh, and I honestly thought that Rick was going to propose to Michonne in front of a dying Anne so that she could see Gabriel's hope come true or whatever, but they kind of just shoved it in at the end, which was fine. It was super-duper okay. Just before we get to the next section, I want to touch on the possibility that the creators believed that the heart of the episode being Gabriel and Jadis, and more than that, Jadis/Anne's inner conflict, was good enough in terms of narrative justification for Rick and Michonne's laterally bulky-looking plot armor, meaning that because she didn't really want to do the horrible thing, or rather because Anne didn't, she intentionally keeps doing things, even subconsciously, that could account for the narrative convenience on Rick and Michonne's side, and furthermore, their stupid amount of luck. Also maybe mirroring the muggers in terms of them showing active kindness later on, and Anne's being more subconscious and passive, or just subtler, or something. And if that's the case, maybe that's okay. But it isn't well enough executed on the side of the lead characters for me to buy that as the reason. It just screamed plot armor when it probably wasn't supposed to, and that annoyed me. It's an admiration/respect versus self-preservation thing, or even self-sabotage. I don't think Jadis intended to get sliced and start bleeding to death, for example, due to her principles. Anyway, I'm about to get more annoyed because these lead characters no longer have Anne to hide behind for narrative convenience. That possible justification we just covered way back a few seconds ago is no longer valid in the final episode because Jadis is fucking dead now. The creators have now killed off their only plot armor validation, and so the plot armor should therefore be less apparent for the final episode. But it is not less apparent. It's more apparent, much bulkier, far more noticeable, and therefore slightly infuriating. It was super duper okay. Episode 6 is titled The Last Time, and this indeed will be the last time we talk about The Walking Dead, at least for a while. If you thought I was ranting before... Is it right that after all this time, all these years, in the final couple of episodes of a season that ends these stories seemingly for good, that the main characters become somehow semi-self-aware, as if they kind of know they're existing in a narrative that they are the heroes of, and therefore are just going through the motions until they win? Because everyone involved in this series just wants a happy ending? I don't know. Is it right that I was hoping for this self-awareness, which is apparent but never admitted or alluded to as much as it seems to be in these final 2 episodes? Is it right that I was hoping for that to end up being the subversion in itself, and that Rick and Michonne's idea that they could take down everything and everyone was in fact arrogant or ignorant, and that they become the ones who live by being humbled by a force greater than them, but still find a way to protect their family, to also better serve other shows going forward, narratively speaking? I don't know that either. I mean, what about a compromise that would give way to a possible future rematch with all friends reunited from across the various spin-off series? The endgame scenario. The CRM versus all the fully developed Walking Dead survivors turned Avengers, basically. Rick, Michonne, RJ, Judith, Daryl, Carol, Maggie, Negan, Herschel, and all their respective communities all teaming up one last time to take down this dominating military presence. One with a 500-year plan that involves cleansing the world of all those who just want to live in peace. Most likely with gas. Nah, fuck that compelling narrative, let's blow him up. Oh boy. The finale. Where do I even begin? Or I've already begun, but how do I even continue? Just how? Well, since a lot of the last section consisted of me ripping into this show pretty harshly, at least by my standards, why don't we try and start with the positives?
I remember it all. What it was like. Who we were. Who we are now.
My name is Michonne. I lost someone years ago.
Both possess something I believe the CRM needs to become what it needs to be.
People are a resource.
I know how to build things and I know how to burn things. But it takes more than that at the end of the world.
I really do think that this show, or perhaps The Walking Dead in general, benefits from non-linear storytelling patterns, which is honestly what I thought they were going for in this last episode, as they did with the first, which would have been a really, really interesting idea, and I think better serve it somehow if they wanted to go this way. This episode had me at the beginning. I won't lie to you, the lovely voiceovers, I mean, I think I'm biased towards voiceovers in general, from all the characters across the series, kind of recapping the journey that we've been on. We hear Rick and Michonne's voices, but we also hear Jadis's, we hear Pearl's, and we hear Nat's. That made me cry, very, very slightly, on first viewing. I like the opening panning shot that goes from their armor to their weapons and possessions, then finally to them spending one last night together before everything may change forever. The show had me, but only for a few minutes. I rewound it, actually, because I wanted to hear the voiceovers again, but it accidentally went back to the previously on section right at the beginning, and this led me to discover that the opening of this episode really isn't served well by the recap section that precedes it, because the recap features Michonne's synopsis to Jadis, as we recently covered, then starts with these voiceovers that are another recap, and then ends like this. The brief music that you'll hear at the tail end of the next clip is the opening credits kicking in, by the way. I won't cut it down. I'm going to let the pauses dictate the awkwardness. What you'll hear is teamed with a nice shot of Rick slowly walking up to a CRM checkpoint in Surrender. Don't let Andrew Lincoln's silky smooth voice distract you too much, as it did me. Listen to the words.
I'm Sergeant Major Rick Grimes. You probably think I'm dead. He said I didn't need to be scared, that it was just the burning.
You hear what I mean? Or those who have seen it see what I mean? I know there are some slow motion shots between his words, so the pauses that you hear might sound more awkward than if you're watching it, but I want to call further attention to Rick's actual words.
He said I didn't need to be scared, that it was just the burning.
When he says this, I guess you're supposed to think of the story that Rick told Okafor in episode 1, which we covered last time around, as it's a bit of a callback to that. We see that principle come up again, but in a kind of mirrored way, because rather than Rick painting his dad as the tragic hero in his head that saved his family in the long term by doing something that was wrong, a principle Rick utilized to get through his imprisonment with the CRM to justify to himself his own existence within such a role. Here, he could be painting the CRM as the monster that burns everything down. Either that, or it's Rick reciting his cover principle in his head as he re-enters the clutches of the CRM, telling himself that story to put himself back in that role internally, like he has done so many times throughout his journey. I think that latter suggestion is what they were going for, and I liked it, but it was initially unclear, which is also fine. It's not a bad thing. I just felt that the execution was somewhat lacking, and I guess maybe it is a bad thing because that's a recurring problem with these final 2 episodes. I know I said I'd start with the things that I liked, but I need to make myself clear here, I think, because it's bothering me again. I believe that most media should bear up to at least 2 viewings. The first time you watch it with the front of your brain, and then the second time, knowing what happens, you can start to notice some of the subtler things that you didn't notice the first time around. Many things can bear up to multiple viewings, read-throughs, or playthroughs. Some you never stop getting things out of, no matter how many times you go back. There are many shows and books, movies and games out there that are like that. For me anyway. And I honestly do feel that the first 4 episodes of this season do in fact bear up to multiple rewatches, and I still believe that despite knowing how it ends. But these 2 episodes, I don't know, it's like they dropped the ball. They gave up. They gave up on the suspense, the intrigue. They just lowered the IQ of all the antagonists, blew them all up, and did the happy ending. And we are technically warned of this all throughout last episode and the beginning of this one, because right after that strange cut to credits, it just does a further cut to Rick chatting with Pearl after his debrief, which must have lasted, about 10 minutes? Seriously, they are rushing through this now because they suddenly have to. They don't have time anymore to have the antagonists be realistically suspicious because they need their happy ending and there's only 3/4 of an episode left. So instead, they just have Pearl be the one to work things out slightly too late, and the Major General decide to give Rick the echelon briefing on the same day as his return, while Michonne wanders around like a stormtrooper finding out the logistics of the 500-year plan. Michonne does get a disappearing Batman moment, which, as a Batman fan, I completely adored, at the same time as having the tone absolutely 100% reconfirmed. They are just superheroes now, both in terms of physical ability and perception filters. Because holy crap, the CRM just starts showing holes in their plot armor with their stupidity, their sudden stupidity. Again, they were written smarter than this. I get it. The angle they're going for is, why would Rick come back to the CRM if he finally managed to get away? Even being dead in the CRM's eyes, he could have just stayed away. Why come back? Unless he was a true believer. Or his wife told him to. Sure, okay, fine. But when you break it down a little bit, or watch it more than once, as I said, you realise it's just an excuse for a greatest hits chat on Rick's side and an exposition dump on the Major General's side. Although the exposition that he dumps doesn't actually explain much. I will say that I do like that Rick chooses the throat-ripping moment with the Claimers as his most savage moment in the apocalypse. I think many fans would agree with that. So to see the character talk about it all these years later was pretty cool. Especially when Carl is mentioned again, even though I have my issues with that, as you already know. I also liked how the briefing that the General has given so many times always starts with the two people in the room admitting their most savage act to ensure the survival of another in the apocalypse before the actual briefing begins, as a way of leveling the playing field. But also, in a way, you could argue that the General repeating that admittance so many times over, 2,000 times plus, has possibly made that heinous act or those deaths that he was a part of bringing about just sound or feel like words now, not feelings of guilt for the memories of the mass murder of one group for the survival of another. Although Rick has also made that mistake, but he learned from that. The Major General doesn't seem to have learned from that. He celebrates it, giving him further license to justify to himself this even more heinous 500-year plan. This scene does have redeeming qualities, but as soon as that collective admittance of sin has passed, as soon as the confessions are over, the info dump begins, and sadly, the only thing that I found interesting about it was when the General says this.
Our modeling shows that non-necrotic human life, people, now have 14 or so years left on this planet. Could be quicker.
That's an interesting ticking time bomb that could have been explored in other shows, possibly a race for a cure when it's perhaps discovered that this Walker problem that lives in every living human's brain can possibly have debilitating effects on living humans due to the age of this inescapable infection. So you don't need to be bitten to be turned or even die, it'll just happen to you in time because of how long this thing has been in your brain. Since this virus is apparently airborne, a good evolution of the virus would be it affecting and turning people in other ways, like simply with time. That would be a great possible endgame scenario, a final race for a cure after all this time of this disease kind of just floating around in the background and everyone in the universe just accepting that everyone is infected, making the goal of the story, the whole point about survival until the inevitable end. I've always liked that about The Walking Dead. There are too many zombie shows where a cure becomes the crux or the goal, and The Walking Dead has never really been like that. It could, however, pivot to that as a final goal. I think after all this time, The Walking Dead would be worthy of that, and it would hopefully be different because of all that build-up, but I doubt Robert Kirkman would go for it. But then I remembered that the writers of this show have decided to lower everyone's IQ when it's convenient, so it's possible that the people running these models to predict these things are just wrong, because they all get blown up anyway. Moving on to something else that I really did like, which was Michonne stressing about not being able to find the dossier at first. It was a nice, vulnerable, valuable human moment that I honestly thought they were going to maybe run with a little bit more. Denai Guerrera really made me feel that stress. I loved it. But then she just finds it after calming down. Again, nice message maybe. Stressing doesn't make things clearer in some situations. Stop, collaborate, and listen. Blah, blah, blah. But it's honestly the last time in this whole CRM infiltration sequence where we see Rick and Michonne remotely opposed by the narrative. Michonne is discovered for exactly 1 second and then she just murders that person anyway. Everything seems to be going exceptionally well, infiltration-wise. But the details of the 500-year plan are something else entirely. The plan is hinted slightly to us when we see Michonne finding a soft toy on the floor, which is then taken by another soldier to be stored. After some further sneaking, we see Michonne discover the full extent of the CRM's plan for the children of the towns they are going to annihilate, which did work for the intrigue, on a first watch anyway. You see Michonne wanting to throw up in her helmet when she learns that the CRM are planning to take 10% of the kids from each town, acting as the rescuers, and once the CRM have that percentage, just destroy everyone else under the guise of saving the younger generation. One of the most awful plans I have ever heard. In terms of narrative, however, for the purposes of a fictional story, that's a terrifying and therefore narratively compelling thing for an awful villain to be going around doing within this fictional universe. That's a grand scale threat that you might think you'd need everyone to help combat. Something that must be stopped. A perfect setup for a villain that requires everyone to team up and take them down. An endgame scenario that wouldn't be based around something as cliche as a cure, but about maximizing life that either walkers or villains with choppers and chlorine gas are trying to destroy. Needing, therefore, to maybe keep the Major General alive in order to perhaps discover how widespread this heinous 500-year plan actually is. Maybe this will make things more complicated, unexpectedly. But no, Rick just kills him. There's not even a guard on the General's door or anywhere near his office, leaving Rick free to just murder him and chuck him in a box. It's a cool moment. I like that he gets stabbed by the same sword that saved his life at Fiddler's Square, that Michonne ends up later receiving. But it's like they're using these mirrored meanings and moments as well as actual insert shots from the original show's darkest moments to carry everything as opposed to crafting a compelling narrative. Here's a series of questions that I shall ask myself and answer. Is it compelling or cathartic that Rick just murders the General and puts him in a box? Not really. Is it entertaining and played for slight laughs later on when Michonne opens up the box after Rick gets done beating someone else to death in a more compelling way to the point where he cracks his skull right through with his prosthetic? Yes. Did I also think, however, that it all culminated in a massive waste of potential in order for a quicker finish and a few laughs? Absolutely. And if we want to talk about wasted potential, let's talk about Pearl. I mean, a character who could have been so much more in the future because of how compelling she is, could have even become the new leader of the CRM. We could have seen her fight to keep the only purpose left in her world alive. But nope. She just, as I said, figures everything out too late, giving Michonne and Rick time to put Nat's passed down skills to good use, which is something I did like, and just ends up being the final person to fight. A fight which Pearl, of course, loses, because she ain't one of the ones who live. Oh, and Rick and Michonne are apparently explosion-proof now as well. Or at least Rick is. Also, despite the fact that Rick doesn't have a mask for a good portion of the time that he's fighting, he apparently is fine to breathe in a lot of the surrounding gas and just kick ass anyway. The same gas that took Michonne down for a year after breathing it in for a few seconds. Yes, they are covered up and the gas does rise, but still. Furthermore, Rick then survives an actual grenade by hiding behind a body. Almost again as if the writers were just trolling the audience with plot armor and fake outs, which, I'm sorry, just reminded me of the Glenn dumpster fire moment. A moment that Scott Gimple and co either wish we would forget or wish they had never done in the first place because we saw right through it. And they did it here again. I saw through it again. And though it was less overt and didn't cut away for weeks before we found out it was a fake out, it was still a fake out and just honestly seemed like a final middle finger to any tension, suspense, or intrigue, and to be honest, goodwill that this show had built up over the first 4 episodes. It's also a good thing, I think, that Rick and Michonne arrived back at the CRM just in time for all the upper commanders to be present for an event where they all are required to stand near some gas canisters. So very clever. And of course, we have a radio announcer to tell us that, among other ex machinas, flight corridors have been opened to assure that we give our main characters a brisk ride home to their kids who are just safe and happy. Isn't that just great? The answer is no. It's just Fine. Other than sacrificing a compelling villainous presence that could have strengthened the connective tissue of other shows still to come, I think the biggest problem I'm having is the way in which the creators have approached changing the tone over the course of this particular spin-off series. Episodes 1 to 4 and 5 and 6 feel like two different shows in terms of how they convey the seriousness of given situations and how those situations are dealt with. They did a really good job of showing us the vulnerability of the two lead characters in episodes 1 to 4, and perhaps thought that it was a good way of showing us how unstoppable they really are when later united by contrast. I again understand that, but I feel like they went too far the other way in these final two episodes. It seems to me like one or two things may have occurred here. Either they were limited by time in terms of narrative, or the creators themselves, which in this case includes the actors, got caught up in the drama and emotion of bookending the story of these beloved characters and their family, and so forgot to also make them people in the end, as they travelled from one narrative point of necessity to another, to get to the end that they wanted for the characters. That, and the fact that the ending of the original show was deliberately open-ended to make way for these limited spin-offs, and so, in the eyes of the creators, they wanted or felt they needed a more definitive conclusion to avoid fans accusing them of either a lack of decisiveness or even false advertising. Which comes back, I suppose, to the creators boxing themselves in with this show's title in the first place. I mean, as we've said, it is called The Ones Who Live. It's also about the suspension of disbelief. Something which, as audience members watching shows with certain fictional liberties like zombies as a backdrop, for example, we do a lot of the time. Sometimes without even thinking. But then again, there are different levels of belief suspension that are necessary depending on what it is you're reading or watching. For example, my suspension of disbelief for, say, Star Wars, Batman, Superman, Constantine, or Lord of the Rings, or even Resident Evil is not the same level of belief suspension that I have when it comes to The Walking Dead spin-off or no, considering that in terms of the tone and the themes explored, the only liberty that is really taken is the presence of the walkers themselves. Everything else around them is about the human element, and that mattering above all else. And it's that human element that I feel is missing from this particular spin-off show's final two episodes. Though I also believe that was maybe the creator's intention in some way, to perhaps delineate on some level or another that these characters are, in fact, larger than life, or death, and that a deserved happy ending, after all this time, after all this pain and heartache, means more to us than an ultimate sense of consistency. I can get behind that, sure. I just wish that the creators had shown us that in a more compelling way, without us as an audience having to further suspend our disbelief. How does that saying go? It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, it's been nice talking to you.